Emmerdale that hasn't aired on ITV1 yet, but can be viewed on ITVX. Marlin Dingle Mark Charnock attempted to do something about Celia Daniels J. Griffiths in today's episode of Emmerdale, but reached a dead end very quickly. Marlin learnt about April Windsor's, Amelia Flanagan, ordeal yesterday. He discovered that his little girl has been dealing drugs, being sold to older men for sex, and is now under the impression that she killed a man called Callum. While he was reeling in shock, Dylan Pender's Fred Kettle was up at the farm telling Ray Walters, Joe Absalom, that Marlin knows everything, and that they should also go to the police. Ray managed to convince Dylan that they'd report Celia, but it turned out to be part of a darker plan. As they left the farm, Ray instructed Dylan to open the gate. While he was doing this, Ray video called his mum, who was waiting in Smithy Cottage with a very scared Marlin, Rona Goskirk, Zoe Henry, and April. The trio witnessed Ray hitting Dylan with his car. He then drugged the young man and left. Dylan is now in hospital on life support, and no one knows what state he'll be in if he wakes up. Marlin was of the view in today's episode that if the police find out about Celia and Ray, they won't have any choice but to protect those in danger. This, and his determination to keep his family safe, led him and April to the station. In the interview room, April was dealt another reminder of the nightmare she had a few weeks ago, which featured Ray shooting her dad dead after finding out everything. This made the young woman panic, so she ran out. The detective in charge encouraged Marlin to make a statement anyways, and he did. Unfortunately, the officer then explained that there isn't actually anything they can do at the moment regarding bringing Celia and Ray in. She said that even if they did, they wouldn't compile enough physical evidence in the allotted time frame, and they'd have no choice but to let them go. Marlin still believed in institutions the way other people believed in roast dinners, stubbornly, even when bruised. April's recollection trembled. The memory of Ray's violence, the phantom echo of a gunshot, made her bolt from the interview room before the detective could finish the questions. Marlin stayed because the idea of leaving April alone with this nightmare was worse than any embarrassment. The detective had been polite and brisk, a woman whose weariness had been earned the hard way. "We need evidence," she said, and the words were a legalist's lantern in a room full of fog. "Statements are important, but without physical evidence or corroboration, there's only so much we can do. If we had a different timeline, more to go on, we could act. As it stands, we must follow the law." Marlin left the station with a report filed and a despair that tasted metallic. The law, which had once seemed like the right arm of justice, now bent away from them like a river avoiding a rock. Celia Daniels' control, her charm and her venom wrapped in a neat smile, had blurred lines and buried traces. Ray's muscle and menace had flattened witnesses into a terrified silence. The two of them were a pair, one who stitched people into her web, the other who snapped the strings. When Marlin and April returned home, they found the farmhouse not as they had left it, but reframed by fear. Ray was there, a silhouette against the doorway, a casual menace that made the floor tilt. Rona sat as if she had been planted by force. April's face went an ashen gray when she saw him. Ray's voice was honey-laced poison. He spoke of debts owed, of people who watched, of consequences for those who crossed him. He spoke Pierce's name like a curse, like a lever pressed in an old memory. He used the past as a way to prove his present power. Marlin stepped forward, the father and husband rising in him like an old lion. "You leave us alone," he said. Every syllable was a cracked attempt at calm. "You've done enough." Ray smiled with the practiced ease of someone who knew the sound of his own power. "You're a good man, Marlin," he said. "But good men miss things. Good men don't understand what it takes to survive." Survival, for Ray, meant keeping lines of business clean, keeping witnesses pliable, keeping fear as currency. For Celia, survival was an art, practiced venomous patience. She wasn't in the house that evening, but her presence was a shadow in the corners, a name that clicked like a pistol. The pair were a cyclone in the middle of someone else's life, and the Dingles found themselves at the eye. Outside, the village carried on oblivious. The postman delivered parcels, the butchers trimmed joints with cheerful ignorance, and the pub lights shimmered with laughter. Men and women ate and argued and loved while a family on the edge of Emmerdale felt the ground fall away beneath them. Marlin's plan was child-simple in its honest panic. Get April and Rona out. Find a time when the watchers tired, when the cars grew sparse, and leave. He said the word scarper with a clownish bravado, dingle levity to keep the edges of panic from fraying. Rona's eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to hollow her out. "You can't just run," she said. "What if they follow? What if they wait?" What if they come when we're at our weakest? There were nights when leaving felt like the only way, and mornings when courage puddled in the corners. The truths of violence are slippery. They do their work in private, then spread like oil into the public spaces of daily life. Marlin imagined packing a bag, April clutching a rabbit or a toy, the smell of the farm dissolving into motorway diesel. But even the idea of escape smelled of risk, of cars flagged down by dark men, of a knock on the wrong door at the wrong hour. The village's heartbeat quickened when Dylan Penders did not answer his phone. He had been the one who drove to the farm that afternoon, who spoke with a bravado beyond his years and told Ray that Marlin knew. Ray had told him it was part of the plan, to report Celia and then keep her cornered. Dylan's eyes glittered with youth and rebellion. He wanted to help, to be the man who fixed things. Ray smiled and put him to work. "Open the gate," he said simply, and Dylan did as he was told. When Ray hit Dylan with his car, it was not the immediate cinematic blow that some might imagine. It was a deliberate, clinical thing, a shove of metal, a sob of impact. Ray's face did not twitch. He moved with the economy of someone who had rehearsed consequences like lines of dialogue. He drugged Dylan, wrapped him, placed him somewhere where he would not be found until it served a purpose. Dylan woke in hospital, wires and beeps stitching him to life support, the future a fragile filament. No one expected the police to be anything other than the slow gears they were, but the question pulling everyone taut was this. What had Ray and Celia done that sat outside the reach of quick justice? The detective had said not enough, and those 3 words reverberated like a verdict. Celia's manipulation, her record of plausible deniability, had created a legal impasse. Money, alibis, the slender threads of coercion, all had been arranged with the careful skill of someone who knew where the cameras were and how to hide footprints. In the Dingle kitchen, Marlin sat with his head in his hands. He had filed the statement. He had tried the law. He had done everything a good man does. But the machinery of justice required proof that culprits could not always supply. Evidence, in this modern age, was its own currency. A shred of CCTV, a forensic smell, a witness who would not falter. Celia had kept her tracks clean. Ray had the sort of menace that left bruises the way wind leaves dents in a tin can. The village felt the tremor of fear like a dropped stone. Emmerdale's legends, those fixtures of the place who had weathered storms, moved with a new caution. Old allies offered shelter in whispered conversations. Aaron and Robert, Sarah and Victoria. Even the odd outsider like Charity felt the tremor in the air. Emmerdale was a quilt stitched from gossip, cafe banter, and barbed loyalty. When one patch burned, the rest tightened. Marlin could picture confrontations at lane junctions, fists and fury in the cold, the smell of manure and winter birds. He imagined Ray and Celia cornered by a village that had found its voice. But the law's constraints choked those scenes into impotence. For every fevered dream of public unmasking, Marlin faced the cold reality. Police needed time, evidence, legal hooks. While they gathered, Ray moved. Rona's past with Pierce had given her a delicate, hyper-vigilant knowledge of how abusers repackaged cruelty as care. Ray used memories like tax stamps. He mentioned Pierce's name with the soft cruelty of someone who enjoyed the tremor of old fear. Rona learned to hide her reactions, to press her palms flat, and breathe as if against the tide. April retreated into a shell of silence that frightened Marlin more than any outburst. Children vanish inward when the world becomes hostile. Her eyes flicked to corners where shadows pooled. She counted imaginary watchers like prayer beads. She stopped going to school. She clung to small things, a biscuit, the way a mug was held, to build a life that felt real. In the village, whispers turned into plans. People who had once minded their own business found that living among others meant occasionally stepping into danger for someone else's sake. But solidarity has limits. There were nights when the Dingles slept with one ear raised, and mornings when Marlin drove lanes like a man looking for footprints in fresh snow. Then came a tiny revelation that widened the fracture. A neighbor with a shaky conscience and a habit of noticing things mentioned a van that had stopped outside the farm 3 nights earlier. A name on a manifest that matched a number linked to Celia's business. It was the kind of tiny inconsistency investigators loved. A postal code misfiled, a gate left unlocked. Marlin clung to the thread like a drowning man. If they could find the van, if they could follow it, maybe justice could be pushed into motion. They worked in fits and starts, the village a reluctant army. Aaron used a friend who knew the roads. Charity made a thin phone call that sent someone to check CCTV at a nearby industrial estate. Someone produced a photograph grainy late night, of a van backing into a yard. On the photograph's edge, reflected in a window, was the hint of a logo, a looped script that matched a name on Celia's invoices. The detective's eyes flickered with a different light when Marlin walked into the station again, clutching the photograph like a rosary. Hope is not dead. This could change things, and it was a sentence like a bell. There were raids. There were knocks on doors at dawn. There was the bristling electricity of people who had simply had enough. Ray and Celia found that the law, a slow and lumbering thing, could also be sudden when given the right reason. Ray was taken in for questioning. Celia's business was illuminated in ways that left stains. But even then, justice had curves. Evidence spoke, but translating it into culpability can be a long, legal arithmetic. Celia's smile remained a weapon. She distributed plausible stories like alibis and bloodless truths. The village held its breath as the criminal process trundled forward. Dylan's recovery pulled at them like a tether. His family's faces in the hospital waiting room were maps of fear. Rona watched with a wary hope that felt like a stranger. Marlin found himself wondering whether leaving had ever been the right plan, or whether staying, making a stand, might have been the only way to carve a safer future. Neither running nor simple righteousness made the problem vanish. The law did what it could. It found papers, traced phones, pulled curtains back on transactions. Ray and Celia had been exposed in ways that made them vulnerable to law and public scorn, but the wheels of justice grind, and the public court is not the last word. The Winters story would not be simple. It would be a complicated ledger. Failures and courage, legal technicalities, and hard-won truth. Marlin learned that heroism is often less like a cinematic crescendo and more like the day-to-day endurance of a man who refuses to let fear determine everything. He made mistakes. He ran on raw anger. He misjudged people. But he never stopped trying. Rona began, slowly, to reclaim parts of herself that Pierce and Ray had tried to take. Her laugh returned in small bursts, and she let April braid her hair without flinching. April began to stitch herself back together by degrees, learning new stitches, new ways to hold her body, so the world might not find her broken. In Emmerdale, legends are made of endurance and small acts of refusal. The village's love is not a great theater. It is the daily, stubborn decision to feed someone who is hungry, to look another in the eye and say, "I see you." The Dingles, bruised and wary, found allies who were imperfect and brave, and in those alliances a kind of fortress. On a pale morning, with snow thinning into runoff and the sky a stubborn, brittle blue, Marlin walked outside and let the wind hit his face. It felt like forgiveness and threat all at once, a reminder that the world would always contain both. He held Rona's hand, and April's small fingers threaded between them, and for a moment the future looked like a road that might be walked, slowly, carefully, with eyes open. There would be more hearings, more tests of will and truth. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Emmerdale Echoes.